Take your seat, movie fans. The film's about to start. Welcome back to Craft of Services, the show where we look back at the bad films of cinematic history, the movies that critics rejected but audiences embraced. I'm your host, Aaron Coker. I'm also the host of the Just Enough Trope podcast and the Enterprising Individuals podcast on the Just Enough Trope network. Find out more at justenoughtrope.com. Joining me on the show today is a returning guest, Melissa F. Olson, author of Dead Spots and the Scarlet Bernard series, the Boundary Magic series, as well as Nightshades with Tor Publishing, and her new novel Switchback, which is available for pre-order and will be out on October 24th. Melissa, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning my books, because I get so excited, I kind of forget about that.
Yes. Yes,
you know?
That's my job.
But I totally understand why today's movie, Last Action Hero, can't really be discussed on Just Enough Trope, because it's got about 400% trope.
It's max trope.
It is. It is peak trope.
Yes. Yeah, it's over the top. Although over the top, that'd be another movie we could do on the show.
You totally could.
Before we get started, I had some more questions about your time at film school.
Okay.
I know that film school, from what I've heard, is just all engrossing. You can't do anything else when you're in film school. You're extremely busy. Is that true?
I mean, it's college, man. It's like college. They do discourage you from getting a part-time job or something like that.
Yeah.
But I had a part-time job.
Sure.
Then again, on the other hand, I was not a huge socializer in college. USC is a pretty big school, and LA was quite a culture shock for me, coming from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, population 13,000, go Cardinals. So I stayed home a lot, and I would study. I got to my junior year and realized that I had accidentally taken enough courses to double major, and so I was just like, hey, let's double major. That sounds like a great idea.
Sure.
So I'm not a great person to ask about this. I would not say it was all consuming, no.
Sure.
But then again, I had no social life until junior year. So,
okay. Well, that must have helped. Sure. And also, when you go to film school, and I'm just guessing about this, you can maybe disabuse me of this notion, but film fans who listen to this show, so I have to be careful, can be really particular about stuff. And I'd have to imagine that people who are big enough fans that they want to make films are even worse. Just among my circle of friends, you can be like, well, I haven't seen such and such. Oh my God, you haven't seen such and such?
Oh yeah, there's
how
lots
could
of
you?
that.
Yeah, that has to. Is it really? It's like that at film school?
View shaming people, yes. But in so many ways, there is a divide in film school between the people who want to make money and the people who want to make arty, thought-provoking think piece films.
Okay.
I had sort of known about this beforehand because I applied to two different film schools. I applied to the Tisch School of the Arts, which is at NYU,
right,
and I applied to USC. And I got into both, and I kind of had got to pick, and I went with USC because I was told that Tisch was the place you went for art films and indie films. Okay. This was in the early 2000s, so we weren't that far out of the 90s and the big indie film movement. So I actually like giant blockbuster films. I prefer them. I think I prefer them good. And I think there is such a thing. I like escapism and entertainment in film. So I chose USC specifically for that reason. And when I got there, I found that there was still a very healthy contingent of students who were picture the most douchebaggiest artistes. I think they stopped. This was pre-hipsters. There weren't hipsters weren't a thing yet, but just everything short of the actual black beret was these people's kind of MO.
Sure.
So they would get really excited for we had to do History of the International Film 1 and History of the International Film 2. Okay. So those are two separate semesters. And it didn't actually matter what order you took them in because, 2 was just 1960 and on, and 1 was pre-1960. So it worked in either direction. Mm. And I remember I had I think it was History of the International Cinema too. And in the spirit of international ism, I guess, the school had hired a South American director who did not speak English very well.
Okay.
And so I remember sitting in that class and having these students get really excited because we were going to watch something like Celine and Julie Go Boating, or whatever. And the teacher would lecture on it for like an hour and a half. And I always felt like I was just like in an alternate dimension because I had no idea what he was talking about. And I thought the movies were terrible. The only time in my entire life I have ever fallen asleep during a film in a theater was in the international cinema classes. So I was not a very good, like, arty film student. It's just not my bag.
Sure. Well, you've got people who are on the Jean-Luc Godard track, and then you've got people who are on like the John McTiernan track or the Spielberg track. Sure. So do they mingle at all?
They do. So like, it's really funny because I took a class called Spielberg. And we watch, so all the film classes at USC are set in, they actually take place in a movie theater. Uh-huh. It's a 400-seat Norris Cinema. They have it's one of the best theaters in LA, which is, not a bad place for movie theaters. Right. And so the class took place in the theater, and we would have like an hour or 2 hours of lecture, and then we would screen a film that, had to do with that lecture. So in the Spielberg class, it was just like heaven for me because the professor would lecture on a Spielberg movie and then we would watch it. And so then you have all these arty Godard students kind of sneaking in, like sort of ashamedly because they are also so excited. But they're too cool for it, but also, they're there like ironically.
Yeah, right, right.
But the night that we watched Jaws, Spielberg came in for a Q&A.
Oh, awesome.
Because this is USC, and you can do that there.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, it was a great experience.
Well, that's cool that the two sides could meet up in that way.
Sometimes in certain ways, yes. But the important thing was just to remember that the art side was superior.
I believe that.
The commercial side was going to make money.
Sure, right. And I feel the film we're going to talk about tries to play with those ideas a little bit, and
it does.
I'm not sure it succeeds, but we'll get into it. Look, last time around we talked about the joy of the bad film.
Yep.
And I think we're pushing it to the breaking point this time around. And just you've told your story. I'm going to tell mine now. Let me set the scene.
Tell your story.
It's 1993. My burgeoning action movie fandom is, burgeoning. I'm clutching my Blockbuster card. Well, my more worldly friend's Blockbuster card. T2 has blown everybody away. I managed to sneak into my first R-rated movie, Universal Soldier, which is 22% on Rotten Tomatoes and might appear on the show in the future. Jurassic Park has just come out. I mean, it's 1993.
Yep.
Who's ready for the biggest Arnold Schwarzenegger action blockbuster of all time? Wet fart sound. Last Action Hero.
Yeah, it was totally advertised poorly.
Absolutely. I bought in complete because I remember, and this is one of those, I feel like every time I stick my neck out, like with my friends as far as like, let's go check this out, I'm always wrong. Like I dragged everybody to this because
and then it's your fault. You
absolutely
ruined their day.
Yeah, because I saw the trailer and they show he throws the axe and Schwarzenegger ducks under it, and I'm like, this is going to blow your balls off. No good. They marketed Fifth Element as like Star Wars for the 90s. I dragged everybody to that. And although it's got a cult following these days. It's good in its own way,
but it's not Star Wars.
It's not Star Wars, no. And I dragged everybody to the Ang Lee Hulk movie. So,
Okay, well, that one's just on you.
Big mistakes all around. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I totally bought into it. And yeah, they totally sold it as like, this is the next big action movie from Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Here's the problem with the biggest problem with Last Action Hero is that it came out about 15 years too early.
Interesting.
Because, so, this movie is a satire and a parody and an example of the genre that it's satirizing and parodying, which is, P.S., not that easy of a thing to do. No. And the movie has its flaws. It's about 20 minutes too long, for one thing.
Definitely, yeah.
But at the same time, the the satire, when you're looking back at the 90s, is brilliant. I mean, some of the stuff they do with, like, the guy in the closet, and he, like, walks into his apartment and shoots the closet door.
Yeah.
How'd you know he was in there? There's always a guy in there.
Yeah, right.
It cost me a fortune in closet doors. Like, just stuff like that. I mean, it's genius satire.
Yes, but
at the time, those movies were still coming out.
Yes.
You're not supposed to point out flaws in things that people are still currently enjoying.
Especially if you are the person making those movies
Exactly.
in the way of McTiernan and Shane Black, which we'll get into. Another movie from 1993 that also could feature, for instance, a guy behind a door that you just shoot without thinking would be National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon #1.
Which has Tim Curry, who we talked about for Congo, in one of my favorite... Probably my favorite Tim Curry cameo appearance ever, where he plays the wilderness girl.
Yeah.
Isn't it a little late for selling cookies? The troop leader says we are not meeting our quota.
I was thinking we could do a whole series with you about films that are living in Jurassic Park's shadow.
We could, because so I was reading about the sort of backstory of Last Action Hero, and honestly, it's a miracle that this movie is as good as it is. Whatever level of good you think it is, even if you think it's like 1% good, like it's amazing that it managed to do that.
Sure, okay.
Because it started out with an actually very dark screenplay, which is online, and you can read it, and I read some of it last night. I'm not a fan. It's very kind of dark and cruel, and like the theater owner is the devil, and it's like all about temptation of this young boy. It's really weird.
And this is by Zach Penn and Adam Leff.
Which, you know, it's the point is not that it's good or bad, but that it's different. Like it's its own thing. So they started with that. They had Shane Black do a rewrite. They had William Goldman, author of the Princess Bride book, do a rewrite, and then they let Arnold be a producer for the first time. So not only do you have this director, John McTiernan, but you have Arnold Schwarzenegger suddenly, for the first time in his career, having the ability to like say yes and no on things.
Yeah.
And so kind of taking control over, and you know, the guy guards his image, and it's an image that is lampooned in this movie, which honestly, I'm a little bit impressed with how much they kind of make fun of Arnold. Like the way that he like Jack Slater can't pronounce Arnold's last name just kills me. Never gets old. So you have way too many cooks in this kitchen already. Yeah. And then the studio does this advanced screen, like they rush everybody. They have everybody just churning out this movie, right, way too fast. And then they rush them into an advanced, like a preview screening, which preview screenings are a very typical part of the process. Most movies go through it. Most big movies go through it, I should say. And it's a disaster. And instead of saying, we've got lots of footage, maybe we should like take a beat, re-edit this thing, and just, you know, try and regroup, the studio says, well, we've got this big summer release date. And if we move it, we're going to lose out on the summer revenue.
Well, yeah, we lose money. Right.
So they pushed the film out into the theaters. And if it had been a November movie, it would have been one thing. Or even like, man, this movie could have ruled in February or something. But instead, it comes out 1 week after Jurassic Park.
Right.
Which is disastrous.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons they didn't move it is because, Last Action Hero, they picked their date first. And then in like, you know, to kind of mess with them, Universal put Jurassic Park 1 week earlier. So the studio execs that, is it Warner Brothers? They weren't going to back down from their date after, you know, Universal had slapped them with releasing Jurassic Park. So, like, you know, I think did we talk last time about, like, that really slow-moving car accident that everybody should see coming?
Yes, we did.
Like, it's kind of similar. But at the same time, if you are, like, 15 and you rent this movie with your 10-year-old sister, and neither of you have seen many of the R-rated versions of these big action films, it is kind of miraculous.
I could see that in my mind. I wish that I felt that, though. And you were mentioning before how fast they had to bring it to screen. I read in an interview with McTiernan that they had like maybe 3.5 weeks to edit it before it had to be released, or at least for the screening. Insane for a blockbuster film like that, yeah. And I also read, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but yeah, the screening went poorly. They only had one, and they threw all the comment cards away.
In fact, they burned them.
Yes, because
they didn't want anybody to get them.
Juggernaut had to just make it to the theater, on time. Well, let's talk about business, because you were mentioning money before. So, like we said, it came out on June 13th, 1993, a week after Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. The budget of the film was $85 million, and it ended up making about $137 million. Although I think Sony Columbia claimed a $25 million loss with promotion
because of advertising. I mean, they literally put an ad on the moon. They put it on a rocket or something. Space. Like, I'm not sure who you're advertising to in space. That might have been a little over the top, guys.
Yeah, right. I'm surprised aliens weren't in this film.
Yeah, that's true.
It's 37% on Rotten Tomatoes, 44 on Metacritic, and a 6.3 on IMDb. So, again, it's not, we're not scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but it's definitely on the low end. I also wanted to say, like I say at the beginning of every show, that we look at films that are generally lower than 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, and they are generally well-remembered, which I think you've got covered in this case.
Oh, yeah. Much love.
And I want to say that we're not in the pocket of Big Tomato. We don't endorse Rotten Tomatoes. We're just using it as a metric. And for this film specifically, you can see some of the problems with review aggregation, at least in terms of finding out what reviewers thought at the time. Because nearly all the Rotten Tomato reviews that I saw for this film are from the year 2000 or later, after internet criticism started to ramp up. So you're seeing a lot of AV Club think pieces on like, hey, give it another chance.
Right. I honestly, I'm Team AV on that one. I think this movie does deserve another chance. Mm-hmm. And I'm fully willing to admit that some of this has to do with nostalgia. I was talking to my husband about the movie, and one of the things that I really, truly love about this film is the way that it loves movies. Our point of view character is Danny, this, little boy, not little, but he's probably, 12, 13?
Sure.
And he loves movies so much that he cut school to go to them, which if I had the guts, I would never have shown up in school. I was too scared to cut, but man, respect. Right. So anyway, Danny loves them so much, and Jack Slater is his hero. Jack Slater can do no wrong. He has so much love for him, and the way that he gets excited about the new Jack Slater, man, that really spoke to young Melissa, because I remember that feeling of being so excited for a movie to come out that you literally just were counting down days.
Me too, for this movie.
Oh. See, I didn't see it until probably 4 or 5 years after it came out.
Okay.
And so I missed all of the hype up, ramp up stuff.
Sure.
For me, it was a movie rental, and by then I had just only recently seen like Lethal Weapon and Die Hard and a lot of movies that this movie is parodying.
Right.
So it was very fresh and original to me because I couldn't believe that it was making fun of this. And honestly, a lot of the satire went right over my head at the time.
Okay.
Because it is an action movie.
Yeah.
Like, it is a big blockbuster action movie, just like it promises.
Right.
And a lot of it you don't pick up on the first viewing or, the fourth viewing.
Yeah.
Even last night, I rewatched the movie for this podcast, and I picked up some things that I had missed before. Like, I never really noticed that. So at the beginning of the movie, we open with a flashback to the last film. But then when Danny starts watching Jack Slater 4 in the theater,
right,
the first scene of the movie within the movie is an attack on Jack's favorite second cousin, Frank, which was an intentional joke. Because at that point, by the fourth movie, all of Jack's family has been attacked, and they're like running out of people for the bad guys to go after.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny.
Played by Art Carney in his last film role.
Yes, everybody talks about that. Yes, but so then the house explodes. There's two cops go flying, a white cop and a black cop, and the black cop, who's older, looks up and goes, 2 days till retirement.
Right, and then the Lethal Weapon saxophone goes. Nah,
and
nah.
that's what I never picked up until last night. I knew that it was a Lethal Weapon thing, but I didn't pick up the Lethal Weapon chords that play.
Sure. There are a lot of musical sort of leitmotifs in this. I didn't hear it myself, but I read that when Danny's making the argument to Jack about how, hey, you don't know if the guy's dead. It could be like in Die Hard. Apparently, like the little tinkle of a Die Hard theme plays or something in the background. Yeah. And also before they play Chicken, of course, there's the the guitar, like the.
There's even there's a lot of interesting musical notes, or musical cues, I should say. Like one of my favorite just non-explosion scenes is when Jack first goes to the bad guy's house, and he and Danny are questioning Benedict, and he snaps his fingers and the dogs stack on top of each other. Yeah. And you're supposed to be really scared because that's very threatening, and Charles Dance does verbal threats like nobody's business.
Yeah.
By the way, many years later, when Game of Thrones first started airing, I was like, oh yeah, it's the bad guy from Last Action Hero.
Okay.
Because that was my only reference for
I thought the good guy from Alien 3.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's another way to look at it. But no, I hadn't even that's how I know Charles Dance. This movie is how I know Charles Dance. Anyway, there's this musical cue, or this audio cue, where Jack threatens him back, and then all the dogs go they're so scared.
Yeah.
Or at the end of the film, when Jack is swinging Danny up onto the building, and we're back in the real world now, where things are supposed to be all dark and realistic, but the audio cue is a whip cracking.
Okay.
Like an Indiana Jones style whip crack. And swings him.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of my sort of problems with the film. And sure, there's a lot to manage. There are 5 different screenwriters, and they're trying to set, a difference between the movie world and the real world. But one of my complaints, and I think that it's a popular one among the film's detractors, is that there isn't much difference between the real world and the movie world.
Well, I think there is in terms of cinematography.
Oh, yeah, they made a clear choice on that.
Oh, yeah. And because the real one of the things that I like is, so in the early stages of Last Action Hero, the overall film that we're watching, you have this very clear divide between New York is very dark and bleak. Hollywood in the Jack Slater universe is all sunshiny and bright colors and happy. But also the movie theater has its own cinematography. Everything in there is gold. It's gold hues. It's very sort of warmly lit. It's clearly supposed to be this haven for Danny. It's the one place where he feels happy. Right. So at the beginning of the film, you have this very clear distinction. But then later in the film, as Jack Slater sort of begins to adapt to New York, the difference in cinematography sort of folds in. I thought it was more of a choice where they're trying to show that he is getting used to the real world. It's the worlds colliding. Yeah. And he's sort of becoming a part of the modern world. But they do have the little jokes where, he punches in the car window and he's like, holy crap, that hurt.
I think I think you're meeting the movie more than halfway, but I agree with your observations. And here's another problem that the movie has too, is that it never really, you mentioned the opening, and then also the opening of the Jack Slater 4 that he's watching within the film. You've got this weird thing where they do this fake out thing, which I think is a great idea and works pretty good, where we're watching the end of Jack Slater 3. Right. But it's the beginning of this movie. As a climax for Jack Slater 3, that's a real crappy climax. That's not really the last act or last scene of a film. It's the opening scene of a film, of this film in particular, but I don't know how much they really applied themselves to trying to make the film seem like actual films. Actually, you know what? I have so many questions about this. I could just go through in a list, I guess, or you could just say things you like and I could try to tear them down. But
that sounds so fun.
Yeah, let's not do that though. How does the magic ticket affect the world of the films in general? Like, if Jack steps out of this cut of Jack Slater 4,
right,
does he disappear from all of them?
No. One of the things I like about this movie, and I actually made a note of it, is that there's actual world building to this, which we sort of find out late in the movie when Benedict starts like traveling into other films and bringing people out. Right. So that the impression that I always got is that each film is its own universe. Now, if you take Jack out of Jack Slater, I don't know if the Jack Slater 4 universe like freezes until he comes back. My kind of suspicion would be that everybody keeps going about their business. Because You'll notice in Jack Slater 4, everybody has things to do. Like, they're all moving around busy little worker bees. And Jack is sort of this agent of chaos that bounces through them, sometimes literally in his car. Did you notice the ridiculousness of the bad driving? Oh, I loved it.
Right. The only time that the car actually like parks is when it's parked by the valet person at the LAPD.
Right. Like, there's a moment where they leave a parking garage, and for absolutely no reason, Jack starts going up the do not enter exit.
Yeah.
And then another car like starts down, and it like bumps over to the right side for no reason. I think destruction of the city is one of the things they're kind of poking fun at here. Because at one point, Danny's like, you destroyed even more of the city than usual. You know, so they're kind of making fun of the amount of damage that Jack does.
Sure.
Anyway, so your question was what happens in the other universes.
I mean, it seems like it's a Purple Rosa Cairo situation where there's other prints of the film or whatever. This is just happening in like sort of one world. I suppose they do. So like Charles Dance, Benedict, his character is, he goes and gets the Ripper, and he gets the Ripper from Jack Slater 3.
Yeah.
So I assume that he has to explain to him, I don't know at what part of the movie he gets him, but he has to explain to him that Jack's going to kill you, so you want to get revenge on him.
I don't think he does, because the Ripper already hates Jack by the end of Jack Slater 3.
Right, but in the confrontation on the rooftop, he's like, oh, we've already played this scene, so he must not have come from that.
Yeah.
I guess my point is that I just don't. I'm the kind of person who, okay, so pitch me an action comedy fantasy. Wow, that's a lot of quadrants there. I'm in, but like I'm the kind of nerd that like I'm gonna double check the details. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you could just sit back and go, oh, I get it. People come out of movies and you can go into them. But I'm like, wait a minute though. Like, what are the rules of your crazy universe? Because this movie is very referential. It literally references Looney Tunes like several times.
Yes.
And even in Looney Tunes, there are sort of rules. You can't fall if you don't look down, for instance. If you are squished flat, you can blow yourself back up again.
I think there are certainly rules. We really see them at the end of the film when Ian McKellen as Death. Man, I love that so much. Like, the ticket sort of... One of the themes of this movie is that the ticket has a mind of its own, and it is not really playing by anyone's, like, it's not in favor of one team or another, you know?
Right.
It's sort of a neutral force of chaos. So the ticket falls in the theater where they are showing The Seventh Seal, and Death walks out of that moment of the movie.
Yeah.
So my impression was always just that Benedict went to a movie that was playing Jack Slater 3 and waited until the Ripper was about to kill Danny, or maybe had just killed Danny but hadn't tried to kill Jack yet, snatches him out and explains the real world. You do get a quick glimpse of Benedict like having this hilarious sit down like in a coffee shop or a diner or something with the Ripper. Where he's like, look, you know, I know this is crazy, but bear with me and I'm going to give you everything you've ever wanted. And the Ripper's pretty nuts. I mean, we established that really early on.
Right.
By the way, the whole active shooter at a school thing, not as fun anymore.
No. Not really. Also, one of the promotional things they did for the film was had a giant Jack Slater holding dynamite that they had in Times Square or something like that.
Nice.
And this, of course, is around the time of the first World Trade bombing, so they took that down real fast.
Yeah.
I did like how they, you also see Benedict like sitting around drinking coffee and like flipping through the movie ads. And he's like circling like, and then of course like the one thing I like is that speech at the end when he's trying to shoot Jack and Danny on the rooftop, and he's like, "Oh, we'll get Frankenstein, and we'll have this guy in." And what do you think about Hannibal Lecter can do the catering?
Will do the catering, yes.
But that promises to me a much bigger movie that we never really got.
The thing is, they could have gone in so many more directions with sequels to this movie. It wouldn't even need to be a Jack Slater movie. If Danny has the ticket, he could have literally just walked into another movie and the whole thing could have gone off there. Maybe he parodies horror movies where he wanders into Scream 2 and is like, guys, what are we doing here?
Oh, no. Now we're into Zucker Brothers territory.
Yeah.
Or Abrams, yeah. Well, that's another question I have. Is this trying to do too much? Because and of course, like we said, there were at least three rounds of writing on it. I think at one point after Black had been fired and Goldman had been brought on, McTiernan went back to Black and said, "Can you fix this?" And so they made up, and Black came back and tried to do some more. But it seems like we've got a Wizard of Oz story, which is a kid escaping into movies, which is one type of film. We've got the original idea of the film, which is just like an action parody type thing. And then you've got all the elements that Goldman added. I think Goldman added the Benedict character, and perhaps the idea that, there would be movie villains or something like that. Is it too much for one movie? Because they've got 2 hours and 10 minutes to figure it out, and it still doesn't really work.
Well, and like I said at the beginning, I think it's about 20 minutes too long.
Yeah, the structure is really effed up because as you're watching it, that the third act just naturally is, okay, they go to the real world. But they spend all that time in the middle, especially with that set piece with the Leo the Fart funeral where they're doing all that stuff.
Yep.
And it's like they want, and I know that was written specifically.
And he wipes off the tar.
Yeah, there was written. Well, I have a comment about that. It's written specifically by Black and Arnott. That's like a set piece they wanted in there. And my thing is, okay, this is still action as an action comedy fantasy. You want to have a big set piece, but that takes up weight. You could lose that, and we lose nothing, from the film.
Excuse me. We would lose the look elephant, which is arguably. This movie is so freaking quotable. I have to say, the lines in this movie are so genius. Although, by the way, I was 30 before I understood. You want to be a farmer? Here's a couple of acres.
Here's a couple of acres. Yeah. We used to do that to
30.
each other all the time when we were kids.
Aaron,
yeah,
30.
Yeah, but that whole part slows it all down.
It does,
and I think it's part of the movie fighting against its nature because it wants to be this action movie, so you're going to need something big in the middle. And to be honest, the elevator stunt's cool. Like when the elevator gets blown through by the helicopter and it falls apart, and all that would fit perfectly in a Die Hard movie. But while we're doing that, we're not going back to the real world and paying off all the magic stuff. Mercedes Ruehl is not in this movie nearly enough, but there's no reason for her to be because the movie doesn't take her seriously as a character. And also, something else about the tar thing is the first time in a long time that Danny does anything to point out that this is a film. My idea was, okay, kid knows it's a film. I love the first maybe 20 minutes of the film, when he's watching the film and he's like, thing blows up, he's fine, minor wound, both cops dead.
Yes.
He's calling out the tropes. But then he gets into the film and has no fun. He's achieved his dream. He's inside of an action movie, and all he can do is try to undercut everything and try to prove to everybody that they're in a film instead of I imagine a different film where he's using his knowledge of all the tropes and succeeding and, actually sort of forwarding the plot instead of trying to keep going, why does that happen? Why does that happen?
Yeah, no, I have to disagree though, because he does, when he first is sent into the film world, he does try to prove to Jack who he is, because frankly, Jack is demanding answers, and there isn't a great lie that will explain everything. But as soon as the captain assigns him and him and Jack Slater to be partners, Danny has this moment of understanding where he's like, oh, okay, I'll teach you to be vulnerable. You'll teach me to be tough. I get it. I see what we're doing here. And then he's into the crime and he's trying to find Benedict's house. So as soon as he understands what his part is, he has another realization later where he's been helping Jack, and then he's on this bike, and he decides to play chicken, and he's like, wait a minute. I'm actually just the comedy sidekick.
But why did he ever
die?
Why did he think that would ever work, though?
I think because he thought he was a partner, And then he realizes, no, wait, I'm not actually a partner.
I'm not Riggs. I'm just, right.
Right. I'm just a comedy sidekick and therefore expendable.
Yeah, I wish the movie would have just exploited more things like that. Like there's a part where he keeps, first of all, you mentioned guns before. This movie is we're worried about like depicting gun violence because a little kid is running around with a hand cannon like the entire film. And he'll get into a thing where Jack gets tied up with the villain or the criminal and he has to sort of do crowd control. And he'll run out and just go blam, blam, blam. He's like, hey, I need help. And everybody just scatters and runs, which is what would happen in real life. Right. You think that he'd be able to hold a gun on a guy that's operating a crane, and then that guy would operate the crane. Or I just wish that there was something that he knew about films or that he'd seen in a film that would allow him to exploit the universe that he's in. But instead, he just ends up being like a kid that doesn't belong in an action movie.
Well, just because he's in the movie world doesn't mean he's part of the movie mythology.
Right, but
also, I think you're taking nitpicking to, like, next level.
oh,
like, there are so many big things that you could critique about this movie, and you're upset because people run away when a kid waves a gun?
Well, I'm upset that this kid spends so much time with the old guy that runs the theater. Like, if I was his mom, she's a bad mom. Like, we know that he's fine. He just loves Harry Houdini in movies, but that's probably a toxic relationship.
What? Oh, my gosh, dude. What is wrong with you?
Okay,
all right.
Why
are you putting, like,
you're a mother
pervert vibe on something you don't know anything about?
You're a mother.
I am.
Here's an old guy. I'm going to have your kids.
I have girls.
Okay, well, oh boy, even better.
That's a different thing. I don't know why it is, but it is. But
okay, no, right.
There's nothing to suggest that she's never gone to the theater or met this guy.
Well,
like,
she doesn't seem to like...
She said she refers to the crazy old man, so she's met him.
And she knows that he's crazy.
Well, you say that about a lot of people without actually thinking that they have a certifiable mental illness.
Why doesn't she know who Schwarzenegger is?
What do you mean?
So Danny shows up like the third or fourth time he's been out all night, and he shows up with Jack.
That kid needs like consequences, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, no kidding. Well, he's latchkey. What do you want? He shows up with Jack coming out of the movie.
Yep.
And we know that other people see Jack in the real world, and they know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is.
Right.
Is she just so, ignorant of films and television that she doesn't know what Arnold Schwarzenegger looks like?
Well, first of all, he was not yet the governor, so you had to be a movie person to know
I guess.
Who he was. And she listens to classical music.
Right, she's an NPR lady. Right.
All we really know about this woman is that she works at night, and I'm thinking like maybe waitress, judging by her outfit.
Possibly, yeah.
And she listens to classical music, and she's frantic about her son, who she can't control because he runs out at night when she really has no way of stopping him. So
right.
I'm not real upset that she doesn't recognize Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like,
yeah.
This woman has a lot going on.
Just one line about how, oh, yeah, I get that a lot or something.
But I want to go back to what you were talking about with the film structure, because I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think it's bloated, but there's actually a very clear 3-act structure, which is kind of funny. Like, the first act is, the inciting incident, Danny's in California, right?
Right.
Well, he's in the Jack Slater film. That's act 1. But it's, it really runs up until the moment where he and Jack are made partners. Because the sort of plot of that first act is this magical thing happens to Danny. Nobody believes him. He doesn't know what he's doing. Then you have this flip where now act 2 is Jack and Danny solving crime. And now belief no longer really matters. It doesn't matter that Jack doesn't really believe him because, they're chasing Benedict and they're meeting Whitney and the fighting of the bad guys and getting yelled at by the captain and all that stuff. So it no longer really matters who believes who. And then Act 3 is very clearly Jack goes to New York, and that act is so much less happy than the previous ones because it's about this sober realization for Jack that he's imaginary and that everything that's happened to him down to like the death of his child was made up for someone's amusement. So there's kind of a weird like existential. So I think the structure is pretty clear. It's just that the mood of the film changes so drastically.
That's a great point.
You know?
And I respect them totally because, again, that's another, maybe a Purple Rose of Cairo situation, but that's another great commentary on the sort of stories that we tell and the things that we do to characters.
Yes.
As an author, I think you could appreciate that.
Yeah.
But it's too late in the third act. It's underwritten and it's underperformed by Schwarzenegger, who I would not expect to be able to pull off something like that. Like, I wouldn't ask that of him, but I don't think that it really comes through all that well.
Well, you're wrong. You're wrong about all the bad things you're saying. Just so you
okay.
know.
All right, good. I want to talk about another film that has a kind of similar premise and deals with something sort of metafictional. Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Oh, which I'm afraid I haven't seen since I was like 12.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. But it has a similar structure. They go to Toontown for kind of the late second act in a similar way. And then they come back and solve the problem in the real world. And it gets it done in like an hour 44.
Okay.
I feel like the setup of this movie is too long. I mean, I don't know how long it takes to show us that New York is a crap sack. Like, we got that. And there's this whole weird scene where the burglar breaks in and like threatens Danny.
Which is very dark. And I think that's in line
dark.
with showing us how cruel the real world is, so that later it can be effective for Jack to enter it.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, a little bit of rain and some porno movie marquees, and we know how bad New York is.
Well, think of later in the movie when there are muggers stealing, like robbing and killing people for their shoes. Like, in order for that to pay off, you almost sort of have to have a beat of it being bleak early in the movie. Otherwise, because, man, first of all, I love Charles Dance finding out that he can kill people. Excuse me, I've just shot someone. I did it on purpose. Yes. And the way he delivers that, like, just with just pompous joy, is so fantastic.
Sure. An entire movie of that, please.
Right. And so I think that you kind of need the sort of unhappiness of Danny's life also, so that you can understand why this escapism into the movies is so important to him, and why he keeps sneaking out night after night, even though it breaks his poor mother's heart. You know, I don't disagree that this movie is too long and you need to make cuts somewhere, but I also don't think that's a terrible scene to include. When I was a kid, it was really scary. Yeah.
Well, it scared me as a whatever I was, a mid-teen or whatever.
You know, that's part of his journey. Like, he starts out as not a wimp exactly, but a very passive kid.
Yeah,
when
passive.
When the mugger comes, he doesn't really do anything, say anything. When he's in school and he's like, you know, daydreaming about Hamlet, rather than like participate in the discussion and say, "Man, this is boring. Let's talk about someone else." When his mom yells at him, he just kind of takes it and apologizes. He doesn't say, "You leave me alone every night, man. What am I supposed to do?" He's a very passive kid. And so part of his sort of realizing he's a character in Jack Slater and he has to do things to move the plot, and the running around waving guns, which again was pre-active shooters in school. Yeah. So I don't think we can blame it on that one.
No.
You know, that's all part of his journey to like becoming an active participant in his life.
What do you think the plot of Jack Slater 4 would have been if Danny hadn't been there?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, that's a really great question. You know, Jack says when they're in the real world and they're trying to find Benedict, he says clues just sort of present themselves.
Right.
And I think that is what would have happened, is if Danny wasn't there to provide this eyewitness clue, a different clue would have fallen in Jack's lap. Because that's the thing that comes along with, you know, creators killing your entire family. You at least have an easy time of being a cop.
Right. There's plenty of people to avenge.
Yeah, like your favorite second cousin.
Right.
By the way, I love that it's almost always phrased, my favorite second cousin, Frank, as though that he has like 6 or 7 second cousins named Frank. But this one is the favorite.
This is the one.
This is the one.
Played by veteran actor Art Carney. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Speaking of some of the actors in the film, this has got a really great cast, I think, for what it is. And I'm amazed that a lot of the people, you can definitely tell how big of a star Schwarzenegger was. and also the director and the screenwriter and everybody involved that a lot of these people signed on. You've got F. Mary Abraham, who's in it as a joke.
As like
I think
the
that
third villain.
Right, as a third villain, yeah. Who basically, and as the third villain, you'd have to imagine that he was cast just for the
Mozart
Salieri
thing.
joke. Yeah.
Yeah, just so they can be like, don't trust him, man, he killed Mozart.
Right.
And then later they're like, who's Mozart? I kill a lot of people, I don't know.
I kill a lot of people, I don't know, yeah. Which, if that's, and he took it just for fun and for the paycheck, then good on him, I guess. Like you said, Charles Dance, of course, and this is like a lot of stuff for Charles Dance. I mean, he wasn't really a big name, but it was kind of cool.
But Anthony Quinn was a pretty big name.
Anthony Quinn was absolutely a big name and didn't have to do this at all, but he did. Ian McKellen, we're way off of Gods and Monsters here, so this is not, or even Bent, like he's not a household name yet. I thought it was funny that Joan Plowright, Olivier's last wife,
Laurence Olivier,
played the teacher in that scene. And then, of course, there's Austin O'Brien, who plays Danny Madigan.
Oh, Austin O'Brien.
I think you're going to have a hard time defending him.
I'm not particularly troubled by him as a child actor.
Sure.
I mean, I wouldn't defend his career now. He hasn't made a movie since 2015.
No, this was, but as far as like A-list stuff, this is pretty much it for him.
Well, no, he also did My Girl 2.
My Girl 2, I'm sorry.
So shut
That's
up.
right, I did say A-list.
Oh, and he did the Babysitter's Club movie.
Oh, did he?
I'm on IMDb right now. I am cheating like nobody's business.
Oh, well, that's fine.
Although I do always remember him from My Girl 2 because I liked that movie so much better than My Girl because I was a child and My Girl was really upsetting. But My Girl 2 is like this fun movie.
I try to imagine what it would have been like if they had had a better kid actor. And, it's tough. Like, kids aren't great actors all the time.
No.
But if Danny had been more, I don't know, he's just kind of really earnest and sort of whiny, and you don't really believe his deliveries. Like, if there was just some like 90s version of Haley Joel Osment or something like that, I think that I would have believed and been more invested in it.
Wasn't Haley Joel Osment the 90s version of Haley Joel Osment?
He was pretty young in Sixth Sense,
Oh, I
right?
have no idea. Okay.
Yeah, that was 99, so...
Yeah, honestly, Austin O'Brien doesn't bother me. I could see why some people might be bothered by him, but it's really not his movie. He's the POV, Like, he really exists to walk us through everything else. I don't need him to give us an Oscar. Like, I don't need Jacob Tremblay in the room right now, Like, just get us to Arnold. Do your thing.
Sure.
It'll be fine.
I want a remake with Jacob Tremblay as Danny Madigan in the remake of Last Action Hero.
I would pay money for that, but frankly, I still pay money for this.
Actually, no. Wait a minute.
Oh my gosh.
It's a reboot, but it's a continuation of Room. So they're out of the room now.
This is getting...
Brie Larson is in the Mercedes Ruehl role. The little kid from the room, he grew up watching TV. He doesn't understand that it's, it's magic or it's not, or it's the real world or it's not. And so then he's introduced to this ticket and it's all connected. We could do a Roomiverse.
Are you drinking during these podcasts?
That's the only way I can get through it.
Oh my gosh, I love this movie.
Last Action Hero.
I don't care. I love it.
All right, fine.
By the way, I had forgotten that so I was thinking about the unnecessary car chase, like the initial one at the beginning of this film, where they're actually in the riverbed.
Yeah,
like,
they have to go to the LA River.
Yeah,
of course.
I thought that was fantastic. But the puns in this movie are like next level. Iced that one Tacona phrase.
Like a level up or down. Tacona phrase. Right,
I actually was trying to make a list of so that I could nominate a best pun for when we did this podcast. And honestly, I think I'm going to have to settle on "got to catch the red eye."
That's a pretty good one.
You have to remember that this movie insists upon being an example of the genre that it's satirizing.
Yeah.
So if you look at something like Not Another Teen Movie, That's just
Right.
a parody. They're not really trying to have a cohesive plot and be an example of the film.
No,
They're
it's
just
all
they're-
sending up of tropes.
yeah,
Right,
it's
right.
it's imitation for humor, and that's fine. That is what it is. But Last Action Hero, you can agree with this decision or you can disagree with this decision. I see it both ways. It insists upon being part of the genre.
Right.
Now, I can see a case for that's why it becomes kind of a mess, but I also see a case for that's what makes it interesting. Because you have so much satire, but you also have a good time. As long as you're not Aaron, who gets weird about the mythology of it's a fucking magic ticket, pardon my language.
I'm all about
Magic
but that's the other thing. So, the world of movies is this weird world where all these things happen. Danny, you live in a world where magic is real. Like, this is a magic ticket. Magic is real in their universe.
Yeah. Well, no,
in the real world.
Houdini had actual magic.
Who, by the way, was not like a close-up magic guy. Like, he was an escape artist, and he committed he committed the last half of his life to debunking mystics and mediums and
part
and
of that
magic
was because he desperately wanted them to be real.
to talk to his dead mom.
He wanted to believe. Okay,
Yeah.
he is the
He was
original
the Fox Mulder
I
of
want
his
to believe.
time.
So
Right.
no, I think that it's a lot like Hitchcock never explained he never got deep into the why are the birds freaking out and attacking everybody.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because it's a thought experiment. If X were real, how would Y play out? And that's how I see this movie. If you really could get in and out of your favorite movies and you give this power to a kid who's whose hero is Jack Slater, an Arnold Schwarzenegger character, what would happen?
Yeah.
But, one thing that you haven't brought up, and I'm very surprised, is that Blockbuster has a cameo in this movie.
Well, it has to. It's all about movies.
And can we talk about how they dress at the Blockbuster in Jack Slater 4 world?
Is that how you dressed when you worked at Blockbuster?
It is so funny because we did. That exact outfit was my regulation uniform.
What was Angie Everhart like? Like, was she a nice coworker? Or?
She was. It's funny that you say that because when I worked at the Blockbuster in Beverly Hills, which I really did wait on Angie Everhart once.
Did you? Oh,
I'm not
all
making
right.
that up. That is a true thing that happened.
Okay. All right.
So that's why I was laughing last night. But also because it's just the whole Blockbuster scene is hilarious. Everything about it is funny, especially if you work. It's like 3 times as funny if you worked in a Blockbuster and you know what kind of grunt work it is to just be okay. There's nobody in that store, and they're not dusting shelves or doing inventory or anything. They're basically just standing around posing.
Right.
And even in
you've got
Beverly Hills, because I worked there, we had to do inventory.
Oh, sure, of course. Or put up the Stallone in T2 standees.
Oh, yeah. Stallone.
I do like that joke.
Great in this.
I'm all for going through these tropes and making fun of them. But for me, it's more I like the clever sort of observations or the clever additions.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in that chase where they're fighting the gang in the a classic truck that's throwing dynamite at them. It's Acme Dynamite. There's a minivan and the door opens and a minigun comes out. And it's just to me, that was funny.
Or how about the funeral for the mobster where everybody, including the nuns and the 80-year-old grandparents, are armed with Uzis?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's kind of like a Mafia. Remember Mafia starring, what's his name? Yeah. That's kind of a joke from that.
One of my favorite Arnold moments is when he in that same funeral sequence. He falls in slow motion off the elevator, right? Because he was holding a piece of the elevator and it breaks off. And so in slow motion, as he slowly falls, and as he's falling, he's like, what's going on? And he reaches under his arm for the piece of elevator that was anchoring him. And
that's our Wile E. Coyote moment. Yeah.
It is. It really is a Wile E. Coyote moment. And it's so funny. That and when he confronts the real Arnold at the end of the film, I don't really like you. You've brought me nothing but pain.
Yeah, which again is one of those really dark moments at a point
and
where
really funny.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny, but you think that, okay, they're chasing the Ripper down. We're going to have this sort of ebullient, like, action thing. And he's like, I don't really like you. And it's like, wow, Arnold, what are you trying to say about, like, your career and, like, your legacy so far?
You can watch this entire movie with that question in mind, and it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, but as you said, like, he's producing now, so he's got, like, a hold on things.
One moment that I think is really interesting is when, so in the film, Arnold Schwarzenegger, playing himself, is walking into the movie premiere, and his wife goes, "Don't plug the restaurants. So tacky when you plug the restaurants." And he's like, yeah. I won't. And then 5 minutes later, he's plugging the restaurants, and she, like, yanks him away. And it's funny. But there's so many levels here where, like, he's poking fun at himself and his reputation. But at the same time, by doing this, he's plugging the restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard this described as Planet Hollywood, the movie.
I don't think that's entirely fair, but because it's more about Danny and his thing. Arnold in that moment that moment is very kind of indicative of his whole attitude about this movie. He wants to poke fun at himself, but gently and with a purpose.
So do you think then, and this is usually the part of the movie where we talk about, like, why critics rejected it, but we can talk about audiences too. Why do you think that audiences weren't buying into it then? Because at this point, like, it's Arnold. He's post T2. There's 6 Planet Hollywoods across the country. He's making this movie and expecting us all to laugh along with him, and the audiences didn't really do that.
I honestly think it's because this movement was still at work. If you go back and you look at the great film satires in history, Young Frankenstein, Scream, even, like, the first Scary Movie.
Hudson Hawk. Sorry, go ahead.
I haven't seen that in a long time. But if you look at all of them, they came out either well after or at the tail end of a trend, right?
Sure.
You don't make fun of the trend until you're done enjoying it. That's a thing. That's a rule. By the time Scream came out, nobody had made a teen slasher movie in years and years. And so it comes out and it's very self-referential. So you wait until people are getting sick of something, and that's when you come out. Now, I don't know if you saw the same thing I did on the IMDb or maybe the Wikipedia page for Last Action Hero. They compare it to Deadpool. And
I did see
that was kind of an interesting comparison. I mean, I think Deadpool is just objectively a better film. But, we were kind of having this burnout on superhero movies. And just when everybody is like, oh, there are no new takes on this, it's getting so boring, it's the same stuff, here comes Deadpool, which is making fun of a superhero movie while still being a superhero movie. Like, right. I think Deadpool succeeds at all the things that Last Action Hero was earnestly trying to do.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. I think the missing ingredient there in the comparison is that I think that Hollywood has a real hard time making fun of itself. I don't mean hard. They do it at the drop of a hat, but I don't think they do it very well. And I would compare it to, I heard once somebody describe the phenomenon that, like, often rock stars don't make good actors. I don't know, Mick Jagger or, whatever. Because the whole character of being a rock star is being an outsized personality. It is projecting this idol that people need to pay attention to and love. And vulnerability is the key to many performances, if not all performances. And so it's hard to make that transition. And I think that Hollywood is so much about hooray for Hollywood and the glitz and the spectacle that when it comes down to them really pointing out what's really ironic and funny and laughable about themselves, they don't do it very well. Well,
I would say I think that they do it well, but they will only serve it with a healthy dose of also love for the industry.
Yeah, right.
And I think a really good example of this is Entourage, which
that's a great point.
Which is often a show about excess, and it's overall incredibly sexist, but in its finer moments, and it does have a very dead-on accurate sort of critique of Hollywood, but then it always has to be couched in this fantasy of wealth and privilege and access, so there are times when it does have very scathing sort of comments to make, but only surrounded by a gentle nest of love.
One of my favorite films is The Player, the Robert Altman film, which is a similar sort of send-up of the industry, but it's very cynical, and basically a guy gets away with murder just, based on the fact that he's a producer and he can sort of do that.
Right.
And even though Altman is a famous director, he's an outsider. He's a Hollywood outsider. So I think that he is prepared to take the kind of shots and go to the lengths that you would need to go to really make a point about, what you see in Hollywood.
You know what movie I watched again recently? It was one of those moments that I think we all have where you're flipping channels and a movie is just starting and you maybe haven't seen it for a while, or it's, whatever. For whatever reason,
Sure.
You land there and then you don't leave.
Right.
And that was America's Sweetheart. Do you remember that movie?
I remember it. I don't think I saw it, though.
You never saw it? Oh.
No.
Honestly, it shares so much with Last Action Hero, down to
Really?
it had a very complicated series of starts and stops before it was made. So Billy Crystal actually wrote America's Sweetheart for himself to do. He wrote the John Cusack role for himself, and he couldn't get financing for the film. And by the time he was able to get financing, he had really aged out of the part. So they get John Cusack, who at the time was doing all these romantic comedies, to play the romantic lead, which is fine, except they have a very different energy as actors. Billy Crystal he's really the When Harry Met Sally persona, with kind of a fast-talking, cool kid that's also a little bit nebbishy, and he's not going to win any fights, but he's got he's the smart aleck. And then John Cusack is much more of the brooding loner guy, and that's where his cool kind of comes from. So they had to do rewrites to make way for John Cusack. And then Julia Roberts signs on, but she wants the supporting role. And what you end up with is Catherine Zeta-Jones doing this brilliant satire of a movie star, very similar to Anna Faris in Lost in Translation. And then you have so much about America's Sweetheart that really lands. They have so many points to make about the way media covers movies and the way they obsess about celebrity relationships far past the point where it's sane or reasonable. And how that whole thing is a machine that feeds itself, because everybody participates. And Christopher Walken plays this sort of, I wouldn't say Robert Altman-esque, but his character is very similar in that he's sort of seen as this auteur who gets to play, he comes to play in Hollywood and everybody's honored that he's there,
Okay, sure.
And he holds the film hostage that they made for most of the junket just to mess with people, for no reason. Hank Azaria, he does some of the whiteface thing, whitewashing, which is not cool. But it's before
that's his
that
whole
was
career,
really
but...
a well-known thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of this movie is garbage because the energy doesn't work with...
Well, geez, I was going to have you come back on it. It's 32% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I would totally talk about this movie forever, but I think we would be treading a lot of the same ground because it's very much about Hollywood satire, but it doesn't quite have the guts. It pulls the punch,
Sure,
It wants to be a romantic comedy. At the same time, it's lampooning the industry that makes romantic comedies.
Yeah.
So
this is the second time in a row, but that's literally the have your sesame cake and eat it too moment.
Yay!
Yay!
By the way, I'm super disappointed that you don't make the title of these podcasts a ridiculous statement that we make during the podcast, like they do for Pod Save America. Because I really wanted this episode to be called Look Elephant.
It could be. Maybe a subtitle. I'm trying to be real serious and businesslike.
Oh, all right. Fine.
That's not fun.
This is obviously a very serious and businesslike movie.
It certainly is.
Look, honestly, nothing you can say will diminish my love for Last Action Hero.
I would never want to.
But I do want to make a quick point about that. Because one of the things that I think about a lot is why fandom works the way it does. There are people who feel so abused by the X-Files, but they keep watching the X-Files. There are people who feel so abused by Game of Thrones, and they will be the loudest critics about it, but they will never stop watching, and they will buy the merchandise.
Hate watching.
And they will own all the little stupid Lannister shields and whatnot. Like,
yeah.
And
Walking Dead.
Don't get me started on stupid Walking Dead. But my point is that, like, a while ago I figured out that fandom means never having to say you're sorry. No, that kind of that recognizing that something is flawed and just adoring it anyway. Like, I feel this way about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which has 2 very weak seasons, and most of the other seasons have at least one episode that just totally falls flat, but I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
Sure.
And I feel the same way about Last Action Hero. Like, you can point out the flaws forever, and they're so there, and I would not deny that it is a very flawed movie. But at the same time, because of the way it feels about movies, it really touched me in my dead little heart when I was a teenager and very impressionable. And that,
I can totally understand that.
Is so much more valuable than the sum of its parts, you know?
Yeah. Well, I know, I get that. I mean, and, you know, I love the Hudson Hawk, which itself is very much a Looney Tunes send-up. Like, a character literally gets blown up and then is all, you know, black with soot.
Which also happens in Last Action Hero, by the way.
Yeah, it does. Just the thing is that, like, I don't think I've ever met anybody who has really loved the film before, so really? I have a lot of questions.
You should, maybe my little sister can be a guest next time.
Because there you go. I
said this before we started recording. Like, my sister and I honestly call each other up and yell, "Look, elephant!" And then hang up.
Well, can we talk about how 90s this film is?
Oh, it's so 90s.
It's all the 90s that ever 90s. Yeah,
it is, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of peak 90s. In only 1993, which is kind of impressive.
Yeah, it is. For some reason, and this isn't 90s at all, but for some reason, Little Richard shows up in the film.
Oh, all of the cameos, and there are a lot of cameos, are stars who were very famous in 1993, and many of them not so much anymore.
Yeah. MC Hammer's in there. Lisa Gibbons, who I guess is probably still around somewhere, but was really big. I don't know. Through E.T. back then.
You get
Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase is in it, and I get the feeling that he's in it just because 1993, of course, was when the Chevy Chase show was on for a glorious 6 weeks.
I never saw the Chevy Chase show.
Oh, well, you didn't miss anything.
Oh, good. Well, hey, I will not put that on my list then. Yeah,
and
Danny DeVito, Sharon Stone.
Yeah, so okay, all right. Now I'm going to ask you a question about the universe of the movie, and I want you to be comfortable with that.
Well, I'm not afraid of you, so go for it.
Okay, so this movie posits that there is one, I guess, police station in all of moviedom that all the characters go in and out of. So we see the T-1000, we see Catherine Trammell from Basic Instinct. But my question is, they then go to a movie store and see a standee for T2. So what? Is it like... Is there a deeper, like, Wreck-It Ralph?
Maybe Robert Patrick wasn't in this Sylvester Stallone T2.
So he's just a cop or something?
Yeah, maybe he's just a cop, man. This is an alternate universe.
I could see it. See, I'm positing a Wreck-It Ralph style, like, central node where they all kind of can congregate in one place, but then they go off to their cyber
like idea,
movie with the ladies in the booty shorts, you know, with the robot faces and stuff like that.
Well, it's kind of like how, you know, like when I'm drinking at a party, I'll get into my theory about Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and how there are like 2 timelines in which all his movies exist.
Okay, so, give us the short version.
Well, okay, first of all, there's
give us the
no
sober
short
version, I guess.
But
give us the sober version.
I'll give you a small example, which is that there's no reason why Commando and Predator couldn't be like a sequel situation.
Sure.
Because there's like the daughter, and he goes out on these missions, and he comes back, you know, he's kind of leaving her. So it really works. And then you could have this cop kind of, he transfers departments, and he's assigned to go to this kindergarten, right?
Right.
And be a teacher, and he doesn't really like that very much. And so he I had this whole thing all like flow charted once. I'm not kidding, but I think it was on a bar napkin. So,
Okay.
and that one leads into True Lies, of course, because he
Right.
always has one daughter. By the way, like
Yeah.
that's like a thing. So you have the Predator timeline, which is the action movies. I'm sorry, it would technically be the Commando timeline, which is the action movies, and then you would also have the comedy timeline, which starts with like Twins.
Okay.
And runs through like Junior, and yeah. So yeah, I can do this whole thing about it. So
Okay.
it's not that I actually really believe it, but it's like the whole theory that all the Pixar movies are set in the same universe. It's a fun thing to think about.
I would posit that Predator would come first
It has
because
to, yeah. That is kind of a hiccup in the system. But I don't know if
'Cause I don't think there's
where I
any-
was drinking at the bar.
well, yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, no, because he has this mission in Predator, and then he comes home, and Commando
Right.
opens with him coming home to his daughter.
Yes.
He can't tell her what his mission was about. It's not
No, it's a great story
there was a
too, but he can't
predator.
tell.
Yeah, no, he can't
Right.
say anything. It's a thing.
Let me add to your theory. Then, in this case, I guess Last Action Hero is a movie in his universe.
It would have to be, yes.
Yes. So he's not the Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's not Jack Slater.
There,
It's just
Jack
a movie
Slater
that
has
is on.
one daughter and an ex-wife.
Yeah.
So if you bend some rules, Jack Slater could be, if the child is played by a different older actress, why couldn't it be part of the Commando Predator timeline?
Okay. So, the Commander Predator one. Well, we do see his wife for sure in True Lies, so perhaps that's a prequel, and she becomes a spy, but they break up, and now he's a cop in L.A.
That might be his second or even his third wife.
Oh, okay, that's a subsequent marriage. Okay.
Yeah, no. You gotta.
We need a
flow
flowchart for this.
Chronological about this, man. If you're really going to be serious about this work,
if you're taking this ridiculous thing seriously, come on. I did like that line. That's the kind of thing that I wanted more of out of Last Action Hero is when Jack's like, "Oh, I hope my ex-wife's not around," and he's like, Danny's like, "Oh, I didn't see her name in the credits. We're okay."
Yeah, that was
like
really
that sort of meta humor is like that really worked for me. I like that.
There's a lot of great meta moments. And before I forget, when we were talking about lampooning Hollywood, one thing that I think bears mentioning is that Shane Black is one of the few screenwriters who gets away with more than others on this. If you think about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang,
it is
very mean.
Yeah, and it's fueled by his own experiences.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's very mean, and it doesn't really pull punches with that. I mean, it could have gone deeper, probably, but then it wouldn't really be a comedy. But just the way you go to a party and somebody's like, "What do you do?" and he makes up some bullshit answer, and she just turns and walks away, and he's like, "Oh, that's it? That we're done?" Or the thing where she talks about how somebody is so old because they're 35, like they hit 35 and it's over. It's over, baby. You missed it. And how old are you? Oh, I'm 34.
34.
Which, by the way, I'm 34
months.
right now, so I'm quite youthful still.
Right.
But
exactly.
the clock is ticking, man.
You haven't missed it.
No, I haven't
there's
missed
still
it
time.
yet.
I agree. And he's certainly he's known as an action director, but if you look at all of his films, there's comedy in there.
Action, yeah.
But definitely. I mean,
blends them
Lethal
well.
Weapon, Last Boy Scout. He does, but not perfectly. I wish that he would, he worked with this David Arnott guy for a while. I wish that he would get hooked up with somebody who was, real funny. Because I think a lot of his jokes do work, especially when they're really specific, like the ones that you mentioned about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. But then he'll put these funny moments in that are, funny for somebody, maybe?
He can't resist it. It doesn't quite fit
exactly.
with what's around it, but he just can't resist the joke.
Exactly, yeah. Last Boy Scout is full of ones like that, where it's I get that you think that's hilarious, but if you tweaked it a little bit, it would work better for an audience or even for the world of the film. Yeah.
To be fair, as a writer, I kind of sympathize because I think we've all had that
because you just want to write what you want to write.
Where
right,
you just, there are jokes that I have typed up and then, sadly, weepingly deleted. But when I do that, I don't hold down the delete button. I have to go delete.
Individual
delete.
tabs.
Because that's the mourning period. That's when
right.
That's
how you say goodbye.
Is doing the individual key smacks. I think Shane Black, there are a lot of things that he can do well, and I think that his action comedy blend is better than most of them around. I think his Iron Man 3 doesn't get enough play. He does really well with the Tony Stark humor.
Yeah.
But then he recently did The Nice Guys, and that was weaker.
I have one more question. I know you're not afraid of me, so
Yeah,
take
I'm not
this
afraid of you.
about the plot armor of the particulars of how things work in this world. Jack leaves his movie. He's now no longer has plot armor. He's human.
Yep.
But Death leaves his movie, and he's still Death. He's got death power.
He's Ian McKellen. What is
Ian
wrong with you?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Ian McKellen just has a lot of lists about when people are going to die.
But
I can
wait a
actually
minute.
believe.
Do we actually see Death kill anyone in the real world?
No, I suppose not.
No.
There's one other thing that I was kind of confused about is that when Jack Slater leaves his movie, he's in sort of wide shot, so he's human sized, I guess.
Sure.
But when we see Ian McKellen as Death leave his movie, it's in a close up, and so you get that neat looking shot, but a shot that doesn't really make a lot of sense, where his gigantic scythe comes out of the screen.
Okay.
Does it like shrink down like once he sets foot on the ground?
Would you say that the scythe is smaller in reality? Is that your argument? Your questions confuse me.
What I've got out of this is that if you don't ask enough a lot of questions, then this is a good movie.
To be fair, though, what modern action movie would you not say that about? And I'm gonna point a couple of big ass fingers at Captain America: Civil War here, because what the hell was that bad guy's plan?
He was some kind of mutant himself, and his power was to see in the future that he'd be able to know exactly when the UPS guy is going to get there or whatever. I agree.
He goes to a ridiculous amount of trouble to gain access to super soldiers, and then he shoots them.
Right, so he can hang out and go, haha, I shot them.
Right, that guy is the worst. He is the worst bad guy.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's fair to point a finger at just Last Action Hero for that. Because
oh no, I wouldn't.
Almost every modern action movie I can think of is guilty of the exact same thing.
That's fair enough. Well, on the show we like to talk about what other critics thought, contemporary critics of the time, in our segment called Pick of the Patch, and I had to look at this in particular because we talked on the last show about how I filed for divorce from Entertainment Weekly after they gave Fight Club an F. But this, of course, was years before 1999, and here's what EW critic Owen Gleiberman had to say about the film. Last Action Hero is a perverse spectacle, a stupid generic slab of action bombast that keeps reminding us it's a stupid generic slab of action bombast. It's a lead balloon of a movie, so top-heavy with referential cuteness that it never begins to levitate as a fantasy. He gave it a D.
Couldn't you imagine him giving the exact same review to Deadpool?
Oh my God.
Think about it.
Yeah.
What in that statement wouldn't also apply to Deadpool?
And he's still well, I'm going to look up his review after this is over.
I don't know if he did or not. But it's interesting to look at a lot of these reviewers because a lot of them, reviewed it later, and they use words like clever and intriguing, and
that's true. Yeah.
It works as a riotous comedy and a rigorous case study of why we go to the movies. It's an inventive Valentine made timeless by audacious shamelessness and shameless audacity. See, I can look things up too.
Well, okay, all right. But to be fair, the USA Today review by Susan, and I'm going to butcher her name, but it's Woloskvana, contemporary from the time, she says, this movie within a movie, action comedy spoof, is too long, it's too loud, and it toys with Schwarzenegger's well-toned cinematic image. But she does go on to say positive things about how some of the jokes do land, and, it's just sort of like a misfire, but a brave misfire.
I would agree with that.
You're not alone.
Yeah. It is brave. Yeah. You got to give him credit for taking a swing, even if you don't believe that it landed, It's brave
to go up against Jurassic Park.
Well, that was a whole different
they didn't.
set of brave.
Well, they didn't know what they were up against.
That was more of the, stupid suicidal brave, as opposed to the let's take a risk in this genre brave.
And that's sometimes what you need from a hero. Hey, by the way, why is it called Last Action Hero?
Are you seriously asking me that question? Is that a real question?
Yeah.
Because
why is he the last?
Because guy that didn't pay attention. at the beginning of the movie, when Joan Plowright is lecturing them about Hamlet, in an effort to get the kids interested, she says, you could argue that Hamlet is the first action hero. Now, at the end of the movie, Jack Slater is going to his captain and saying, I want to do things differently. I want everything to change. I don't understand why we're doing things this way, because he's the last action hero. Hang on. Let me just pick up this microphone and drop it. It's going to be a noise. There. It wasn't
as
satisfying as I wanted, but it's okay.
Well, Melissa, where can people find you online?
I am at melissafolson.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, just with the username Melissa F. Olson. And that's F as in Frankenstein.
Sure. And your new book is coming out soon, October?
Yes. Switchback is coming out just before Halloween. And you can catch up by reading Nightshades in advance if you wish.
Yeah, do that for sure. And that's it for us. The credits are rolling. This is Aaron from Melissa saying, keep it real.